So we talked a lot about kind of the future vision of where pharma could go,
Yep.
especially with ACA pressures mounting on it. How about the present in terms of where you see pharma innovating today?
Yeah. So there are a few opportunities that I think exist. And by the way, let me clarify. What pharma could be doing today, or what pharma is doing today?
Let's start with is.
What they
that
are
might be
doing
the shorter
today.
list.
In terms of what they are doing today. Okay, alrighty. So today, in terms of pharma innovation, and this is going to be pockets, okay?
Yeah.
Certainly, we see pharma being quite innovative in pockets in their use of social media in the non-branded space, okay? Where what the non-branding work does is it creates awareness and advocacy that then spills over into the branded space,
Yeah.
okay? So that's one area. Another area is remote selling. So we're seeing more and more companies who are getting it, that doctors want reps, they just don't want reps when reps want doctors, right? And so
On demand, right?
exactly. So being able to get a rep when I want the rep, and I think to an equal degree the medical scientific liaison when I want them versus just when they decide to drop in on me, is an innovation that's been a long time coming, and has been through, I would say, a few different waves of try, fail, learn, try again in the industry. But that's certainly an innovation that we're seeing. The other thing I would say is, more and more companies are taking the topic of big data more seriously. I don't have any major kind of outcome to report about it, but I can tell you that companies are kind of bringing cross-functional teams together and looking at their data house. I often say their data archipelagos, groups of islands of data, and doing serious work about figuring out how to bring that together in order to get better customer insights, and to understand descriptively, predictively, and I can't remember the word. There's descriptive, predictive, and prescriptive, right? And looking at data and insights in that way, that's innovative. It's not kind of out in the open, but many companies in the industry are now working on that inside. The R&D functions tend to be a bit ahead, but it's just a matter of time that commercial is going to be following up on that. The number of data partnerships and technology partnerships that we're seeing pharma companies making in their innovation investment groups with different companies in the healthcare IT area across the spectrum, from
Like
patient to
EMRs or
HCP.
what type of?
So their EMR plays, their wearables plays, their data partnership plays. There's a plethora of things that are going on out there.
You introduced me to, speaking of wearables, you introduced me to the category of consumables.
Ingestibles.
Ingestibles.
There you go. Right. So this is with Proteus Digital Health.
Yeah.
Well,
That's pretty innovative for today.
That is true, and no one's cracked the code on it yet. What I've been hearing on the grapevine is that we still got to get the cost to an appropriate level.
But this
idea,
what
yes,
that
certainly. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, there are actually a couple of books I want to recommend that anyone who's not read these books in the industry is already falling behind. But I'll remind me to come back to that. But Proteus Health is just one. There are a couple of other companies now who have come up with the technology. It's really radio frequency ID. That's an overly simplistic description of it, but that's what it's most like. That can be embedded in a pill. So imagine a pill that when taken, when it hits your stomach acid, will send a signal to your iPhone as well as to your doctor's office and yes, to your wife and mom, telling them that you took the medication or not. Or not, right? It will then further describe how the body is metabolizing the pill. Some people have postulated that if we have your DNA analysis, your genotype, we can then do pharmacogenetic analysis to understand if your gene type actually is compatible with the pill that you just took, right? But just think from a compliance adherence standpoint by itself.
Because you take it with milk like you were supposed to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What that type of add-on technology with a pill will do just for compliance and adherence.
Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big innovation.
It is.
It's something to watch.
It is.
For sure.
It is indeed. It is indeed. Should I put those book recommendations out there while we're
Sure,
thinking
go
about
ahead.
it?
Let's
So,
talk about the book.
one, everyone ought to read ePatient 2015 by Farjanmar. The other one is The Creative Destruction of Medicine by Eric Topol at Scripps. The other one is The Future of Medicine by Bercy Mesko. He's a Hungarian physician. Really fabulous book that he just brought out. And if you believe that healthcare needs to be more driven as a business than as a social good, right?
That's not the way the trend's going right now.
Well, it's a political debate, right? It's a political philosophic debate. Where does it hurt? The Entrepreneur's Guide to Fixing Healthcare by Jonathan Bush.
Yeah.
President Bush's nephew,
Sure.
or cousin rather, is also a good read.
Athena Health,
Yeah, he's the CEO of Athena Health. That's a good read also.
Yeah, he's a dynamic speaker.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. very
Excellent.
well said.
Thanks for those book
Yes,
recommendations.
Indeed.
I want to switch back to media because
Yeah.
a lot of our folks make their money and exist based on media dollars
Yes.
that we're able to provide them on the digital front, as well as the media dollars they create in other areas.
Yeah.
A lot of times media, at least today, and I think back to the earlier part of the conversation where you talked about how the trusted brand loyalty is an important thing to associate yourself with as a brand.
Yes.
But also engagement metrics matter more and more,
Yeah.
and a lot of times those two don't simultaneously exist. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But increasingly, because of the fragmentation, because there's so many players, and as you mentioned, some of those partners that used to be very noteworthy are being marginalized over time. A lot of times we have to combat that challenge that media is being commoditized.
Yeah.
What recommendations do you have for publishers on avoiding commoditization? And can you talk a little bit about the metrics by which media gets measured today? So in your CMI days, way back when, you used to look at reach and frequency, and that was all that mattered at that time. But now you're looking at different metrics like engagement and viewability metrics. And so what matters from a media perspective today, and how do you avoid commoditization as a publisher?
Okay, so I'll work to take that in two parts.
Sure.
So, avoiding commoditization. Yeah, so there are a few things, and these aren't going to be new things. We're going to be more restating hopefully not the obvious, but what we know already, but which we need to continue to work at. So one thing is we need to continue to figure out ways to prove the link between customer engagement with our channels and their propensity to buy. Now,
Buying's hard to measure for pharma in particular because it's so disconnected. You're not buying razors where you can click on a link and hit the buy button.
That's true.
You've got so many influencers. You have to convince the physician to prescribe. You have to convince the pharmacist to write. You have to or fulfill. You have to convince managed care to pay.
That is true.
It's a trickier
It
mechanism.
is. I agree. That said, there are companies out there with data sets that are doing a progressively better job of looking mostly in aggregate, in de-identified aggregates because of customer privacy challenges at, if you communicate with a certain group, if you can tag that group in de-identified fashion, do they in fact end up, getting a prescription, filling that prescription, and taking that prescription? One company that I've worked with where I've seen success with this, and they're not the only one, is CrossIn's.
Yeah.
I think IMS has this capability. If they don't have it yet, they're working on it.
Yeah.
And then there's another company.
Symphony Healthcare.
Symphony, there you
Yeah.
go. Symphony is the other company that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And so I think that, every publisher will need to look at, their cost structure and their business model and kind of ponder the question of whether it's worth it to them to do this. It may in fact be that for particular customer segments or disease states that there needs to be symposia of publishers that come together and maybe pool resources in order to build kind of the general premise that these customers that we have, when they deal with a particular channel, they buy, so that a general case is made for a group of publishers, and then each publisher can then vet their particular positioning within that customer group, right? Because no customer only uses one medium. Every customer uses multiple media.
You just described our business model to a T.
Okay, all right, very nice. Okay.
That's essentially a big part of what we do. I mean, for those who aren't familiar with an IMS study or Symphony study, typically you're looking at a $30,000 to $50,000, maybe as high as $70,000 investment to actually be able to measure this market share movement.
Yeah.
And the reality is most brands, you're not going to do a $30,000 buy and then turn around and do a $50,000 study to measurement. So generally you're talking about larger scale campaigns,
Right.
$300,000, $400,000, $500,000 style campaigns before this even makes economic sense to layer in the measurement cost.
Right.
And that's in part why networks like us exist, because a lot of the individual publishers, it wouldn't make any sense to do this kind of measurement on their own.
All right, yeah. And of course, what goes with then getting that research is being really good at marketing it, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to market that research to get we as marketers first aware of it, and then secondarily trusting it over time.
Yep.
Right? And there are companies out there that you can partner with, right, who have the ear of market researchers and marketers and executives and companies to actually help you to kind of turn that battleship, if you will,
Yep.
in terms of what perception is. So that's one thing. Another thing, we're talking about avoiding commoditization, is I think, once again, I spoke about this earlier, every publisher has the potential to be valued for their special insight of and relationship with a given customer or customer segment or subject matter area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll tell you that too often when publishers are pitching their wares, and I also recognize that it's very challenging, it's increasingly more challenging for publishers to pitch their wares to the decision maker. They're usually pitching to someone who's downstream of the actual decision maker. But I think that through both direct pitch as well as indirect brand building, that publishers will need to continue to avoid commoditization by emphasizing the special relationship and insights that they have with customers, the customers that they own, I guess I should say their subscribers, as well as the opinion leaders that drive the perception and opinions and influence the purchase behavior of those customers, right? So there's kind of a two-tiered there. I've got a special relationship through my subscription base, and I provide a set of values that they don't get anywhere else, which is why they read me and they believe what I say and they take action as a result of it. Oh, by the way, I've also got a special relationship with these opinion leaders, right, who I get credibility from my association with them, and they influence the buying behavior of the subscribers, right? Now, most publishers might hear me say that and go, well, of course, we've been doing that forever, right? Well, there are many things that we've been doing forever, but we need to evolve how we do it.
Is this another metric you look at, the influence measure of a particular publication?
By and large, no, but largely because no one has given me insight into the business value of it,
Yeah.
nor has anyone given me a easy, consolidated, quantified way of understanding that as a dynamic.
So it's another potential
That's an
competitive
opportunity.
advantage. Yeah, interesting. How about the relative weight of the metrics or the aspects of media that are important? Reach, frequency, engagement. What is the relative weight of the mix today, and how's it changing?
So there's not a generic answer to that, other than to say that it's relative to the objectives of the campaign.
Yep.
Right? So at different stages in a product life cycle, to speak generically, to kind of go back a bit on what I said, different combinations of reach, frequency, and richness. I'll add in a third one, right? Obviously we know what reach and frequency is. When I speak to richness, I'm speaking to the ability to actually capture and hold my attention after you've reached me X number of times, right? Because there's a lot of media that's reaching and getting good frequency on paper, but its richness or its ability to actually cut through and get my attention in a way that I'm going to take action is lacking.
So is that another way of saying engagement for the publisher, not the advertiser?
I think engagement in many ways is the aggregate.
Okay.
You need all three to get an overall engagement,
Yep.
but engagement will be relatively weak to the degree that is lacking any one of those three.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, makes
Right.
sense.
So I don't think that there is kind of a pat or generic answer around the balance of reach, frequency, and richness. Certainly you need some degree of all three, but the objective of the campaign tends to dictate the degree to which you emphasize one more than the other. Now, I wonder, I don't know this for a fact, but I wonder if publishers, when they put together their branding, their marketing, their profiling, do not have an opportunity to actually tamp down commoditization by positioning themselves as being stronger at any one of those three. Either as an overall property, right? I have greater reach than everyone else. I have greater the way that I publish, or the combination of different channels that I use to get my information out. Print plus digital plus social gives me greater frequency within the customer lifestyle.
Yeah.
Or, richness is what I'm better at. Yeah, I've got print, but I've also got social, I've got video, I've got podcasts, right? And so as publishers continue to think about how they position themselves and move up the value curve in the perception of their subscribers and their advertising buyers, I think they need to be thinking about, is that a positioning criteria that's been overlooked in how they serve themselves up and position themselves?
Interesting. Interesting. That's another. You're making me think a lot about kind of some of the value that we bring to some of our publishers by aggregating niche audiences for the benefit of both the marketer in terms of your ability to reach a lot of individuals. It also benefits the publisher because it leverages the reach and the frequency statistics across the board when we can reach them in multiple locations.
Yeah, fair point.
Interesting.
Fair point.
So let me ask a little bit about, we use the term MLR quite a bit, and for those
Medical
who,
legal regulatory.
yeah, for those who aren't familiar, medical, legal, regulatory, it's the review board essentially that often carries a lot of weight, some would argue too much weight within an organization.
Yep. You never hear me say too much weight.
But for those in the audience who have not sat through an MLR review, talk to us a little bit. You mentioned that everything we do is directed by labeling.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the challenges that MLR brings to bear on the pharmaceutical marketer and kind of where and how your hands are tied?
Yeah, so there are four that come to mind when I think about this question. So one is that, the industry right now is in a an extra conservative posture because of the prevalence of corporate integrity agreements that exist. I can't think of very many pharma companies that are not under a CIA right now.
Mm.
And the CIA puts an extra high bar from the Department of Justice and the Office of the Inspector General on and kind of high bar and greater stricture on what companies can do and how they can do it in terms of accountability and reporting and that sort of thing.
Right.
So I think it's important to understand that there's a high compliance bar related to CIAs that are just the general atmosphere of companies right now. And
It's
of course,
the new normal.
it's MLRC actually, Medical, Legal, Regulatory, and Compliance's job to really hold the bar and to make sure that we don't make some of the mistakes, intended or unintended, that got us, into these corporate integrity agreements to begin with, right? The other thing I would say is when we build our business cases for too many programs, we're not really proving well enough what the incremental value of innovation is for programs that are perceptually riskier. So you got a medical, legal, regulatory compliance person sitting there who, let's be fair to them, their jobs rely upon them making the right decision when it comes to our innovation.
Yeah.
A lot of times to us, it's let's be innovative. To them, it's my mortgage, my kid's tuition.
Right.
So we have to empathize with that, right?
Yeah.
And
It's one of the challenges, though, right? I mean, it's hard to do riskless innovation. I mean, by nature of the word, innovation requires a lot of experimentation and trial and error.
but let me make a distinction. You can't do riskless innovation, but you can do appropriately and well justified risk innovation.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at is I think that we as marketers have not been doing as good a job as we might at really building business cases that justify taking the risk appropriately. And every time that we come in and we haven't built that business case and we're caught deer in the headlights by a medical, legal, regulatory team, we lose credibility.
Yeah.
I think if we brought in fewer things, but appropriately conceived, we would build credibility and more things would get approved. Right? So that's been my experience. And I've been on both sides of that. I've been the one who's come in and pitched it for the fifth time and it finally got through because I learned the last four. And I've been the one who had been kicked out and told never to come back again because I didn't take the time to really think through and build the case. Not just from, I should say, not just business case, but also risk case.
Yeah.
Understand it's a risk case that they care about more than the business
Flatten the
case.
rule, right?
And frankly,
Know where their head is, and you're right.
Absolutely,
they care
right.
about the risk.
Right. The third one I would say is that, it's challenging for MLR teams to interpret what the regulations mean in terms of how they should be implemented. And so what that leads to is a great deal of what I'll call interpretive inconsistency. So one of the things that's really frustrating a lot of people in pharma companies is the inability to get a right level of consistency of interpretation from team to team and review to review.
Yeah.
I don't know a company that's not working on trying to fix it, but it's not an easily fixed. It's a very complex dilemma, that we grapple with. Always with the best interest at heart, but there's a highly variable degrees of appetite for risk, as well as interpretation and understanding of what those words on paper mean in terms of how it ought to be applied. So that's something we grapple with. And then the final thing I would say is, nothing in pharma happens in less than 2 years. So I think that we frustrated ourselves a great deal as, innovative leaders in the industry by being unreasonable in terms of our own expectations around the time and the effort and the educating and the bringing along that it takes to get change in environments that are hyper-conservative because of government oversight. Justifiably so. We earned that, right? The government's not being unreasonable, and where what we do can kill people, literally.
No.
Right? And so I think sometimes in our head of steam to get things done, we're not being as savvy and actually being bulls in the china closet and creating detractors and people who are resisting us in our innovation when we could be making more friends, educating better, and bringing people along more quickly. Mm-hmm. So, as much as we're losing time because of the natural, often justifiable conservatism of our peers, we're also losing time because of our own lack of savviness when it comes to change management and leadership.
Interesting.
Yeah.
You answered my next question in part, but I want to ask a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
From an MLR perspective, what can
Yeah.
publishers do? And one of the things you said is they can come in with a better business case that understands the risks involved as well, not just the business case, but what are the risks involved and in terms of protecting the brand. But what else can publishers do to kind of make that process go more smoothly?
Yeah. So because, and don't take this the wrong way, because publishers are kind of 3 degrees of separation out from the MLR.
Yeah.
Right? So there's MLR, then there's the marketing manager. Sometimes there's a promotions manager. Then there's the agency. Then there's the publisher. Right? So what that means is that there is relatively little impact that the publisher can have. But if there's any impact, let me state what I think that is.
Sure.
Okay. So one, I think it's important to understand the players and what their risk perceptions are. Mm. And I think that the type and quality of questions that publishers are asking the agency and the marketer about MLR and their temperament or disposition, the more insights publishers can get into that, the better they can do their part in preparing proposals, business propositions, and risk management propositions that marketers and advertisers that marketers and agencies may not have thought about, but the publisher does think about and thus smooths things out.
Yep. Right?
A second thing, and we already mentioned this, is building the value propositions that actually I should say risk management propositions that lower the risk of the innovation that's being proposed to an acceptable level, such that people are more willing to go with it versus working against it. And then the other thing I would say is really assessing the potential success of their proposal based on the strength and savviness of the champion. So very often, programs get approved or don't get approved, not because of the quality of the program, but because of the credibility and the savviness of the champion and the organization that's taking it forward.
I was thinking that very thing as you were talking through the examples of the times that you've been in to get shot down. I was thinking that
I've been a good champion and I've been a poor champion, right?
Well, I think everybody is at different times, right? My recollections are I can remember some programs that we found 3 or 4 different champions to try and get it through. Once we got the VP of marketing on board, it got done.
Yeah.
And it was like it got done in hours instead of months. I mean,
Absolutely, right?
Depends on who's willing to fight the fight.
That is right. That is right. So I think sometimes we think this is a proposal. It's a good proposal. It will win on its own merit.
Yeah.
But no, it won't. It certainly there is its merit, but its merit coupled with the quality of the championship, the perception of risk or the risk management proposal, certainly the business value that it adds, the business proposal, yeah, those things, come to bear.
Interesting.
Right.
Let's talk about the business value. We talked a
Yes.
little bit about ROI, and
Yes.
you mentioned companies like Crossix and IMS and Symphony
Yep.
doing script lift studies.
Mm-hmm.
And there are literally hundreds of those that have been done over time now to show that digital media moves market share.
Absolutely.
Despite
So
the,
many, it's a
despite
shame.
the naysayers.
So many, it's a shame we're still asking for them,
It-
which
it-
actually brings up something. I'll mention this very quickly. I'm of the opinion, after so many years of doing these studies, that when people are now asking for more ROI, it's a bit of a smokescreen.
Yeah.
It's less about wanting the ROI. It's more about being psychologically uncomfortable with risk
Yep.
and using the ROI as a,
CYA.
there you go.
The other
There you
three-letter
go.
word.
There you go. Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I totally agree.
And the reason I say this is because you can then bring in a stack of these ROI results, and then, people will still hedge.
Yeah.
And then it's something deeper than that.
Yep.
And again, to savviness of champion that we talked about earlier, I think that we frustrate ourselves when we get that question by thinking, well, let me go run another ROI study, when sometimes what would be better to do is say, let's create a safe space and really come clean around what is really going to get you comfortable and accepting of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah.
And that might be a better conversation to have than just going and doing another ROI.
Might be the publisher putting something at risk, making it a little easier.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
agreed.
Yeah.
So the magic question, given that there's 100 studies out there that have shown digital moves market share,
Yeah.
what is the magic bullet that publishers can come up with, or we as an industry can come up with, that will get marketers to triple their digital spend or increase it 5x? It's still relatively small when you consider the amount of time patients and physicians are spending vis-a-vis other media. What's the magic bullet that's really going to move the needle and make it significantly larger?
Yeah. So there's not one bullet, but there are a few, but they're not going to be satisfying when I describe them. But let me describe them nonetheless. So one is there's no substitute for patient persistence over time. And I know that's the unsatisfying one, right? Because a magic bullet is supposed to get me an instant effect. I think that there is no instant effect. When I look back over, the 15
everything
years.
takes 2 years in pharma. So
At least.
you and I have been in the digital
That's to get
space now for
started.
15.
years, right? Yeah. But yet, within that,
It has made a lot of progress.
we've made a lot of progress, but what we've not done is achieve scale,
Yeah.
right? But we talked earlier about scale.
We have, but I could turn around on any campaign that I were to run for you, for example, and I
Yeah.
could make it 10 times bigger
Yeah.
by buying in exchanges and other places that social media or user-generated content. The problem is all the scale is kind of quarantined off as not acceptable platforms due to labeling or due to that conservative nature. The scale is out there. The scale is out there in unbelievable quantities.
Okay.
It's just most of it is marked "Do Not Enter" when it comes to pharma's comfort level of where to place messaging.
Yeah, and so in that scenario, there is no magic bullet. And the reason I say that, we can't do what we can't do.
Yeah.
Now, but let me speak to a social thing in particular. I'm sorry I digress here a bit.
Sure. No.
This won't be very satisfying for publishers, but let me say this. I think that in social media, we have spent far too much time as an industry complaining about how we can't use social media for promotion, but neglecting how we could be using it for customer service.
Big time.
Right.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Now that's not going to do anything for the publishers, I recognize, right?
And that's not just
But-
pharma. To me, that's industry's role in social media.
Okay, fair point. Okay.
It's customer service.
Right, right. So, and then one could say, so back to your question, what would increase by 3x? Okay. Patient persistence over time so that we continue to reach greater numbers of people tipping over to believing in digital.
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's ultimately what gets us that 3X. And that comes of good studies, good stories, good results, and just kind of keeping it out there, in front of people, going back every year and kind of selling, influencing, getting that done. The other thing we talked about earlier is the changing of the guard, which is another function of time.
Yep.
Right? Where we have that vice president of marketing. Actually, let's call him, we need digital VPs of marketing versus personal selling VPs
Sure.
of marketing. And as this cohort of digital VPs of marketing come into the ranks, I think you're going to see that 3X naturally happen on its own.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, when you come down to individual publishers, I think that 3X gets back at things we've mentioned earlier, really emphasizing that special relationship that you have with your subscriber and your KOLs. Really drawing the link around how you can prove that when they are reached through your property, they change their behaviors, they change their thinking, they change how they feel. That results in sales or recommendations or whatever the metric is, right? That ultimately drives the business. I think those are the 3X factors that we have to keep working on. But it's not going to happen overnight. Not going to happen overnight. Certainly another 3X factor is, and this is kind of like a needle in a haystack, but in our market intelligence or our customer intelligence, being savvy enough to really understand and know what is that next product or service that's coming out that's going to have the 3X budget, right? and being
There's
there,
not as many of those.
not as many as there used to be,
Yeah.
and there probably never will be again, because I can't imagine today a sector of healthcare that is going to be as profitable as pharma has been the last 20 years.
Right.
That being as it is, profit's going to look different. It won't be pharma, it's going to be healthcare at large.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be more of a volume business, I think, because of so many more lives in the system, where previously it was more of a price business. So I think as publishers, if I'm a group publisher in a publishing organization today, what I've got to be thinking about is what additional customer groups are emerging as a result of the Affordable Care Act, as well as changes happening in other markets around the world.
Right.
And the same way that I've been successful at getting revenue from meeting the information and community and connection needs of current customers, how do I take that same formula of success and now do that for emerging customers?
Yep.
Right?
Especially if you're leveraging the same audience.
Absolutely.
And a lot of our customers can. I mean, we've seen a big uptick in business from EMRs, from hospitals,
Right.
Historically.
Right, from
not a big
payers,
customer
absolutely,
service.
right, as well as allied healthcare
Payers
professionals.
now actually want sick people for once, because they
There
can't,
you go,
they can't
right.
discriminate against them. So
That's right,
it's
that's right.
quite a different mindset over there too.
You know, I recently wrote this article for HS&M, Healthcare Sales and Marketing. It was about point of care. And we were doing some kind of futuristic thinking about that, and we're thinking about when you think about like healthy real estate, right? Companies like Marriott are going to be doing more healthcare advertising, right? It's going to be they're either going to be promoting resorts around prevention, right? What do you call it? Medical spas,
Yep.
or they're going to be promoting assisted living facility. Right?
Or a
But-
hotel near the hospital.
Absolutely, right? I was talking recently with Jane Saracen Khan of Health Populi, and she was talking about how every major food company now is working on some initiative around food as medicine,
Yeah.
right? So healthy food. So I think we have to start thinking
We're
about these
working with
other potential customers
Yep.
that we maybe hadn't thought about in the past, but who's going to be a part of healthcare now, and where's the potential for getting ad revenue from those customers.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it's
So-
great, it's a great point. We're
Yeah.
talking about your new customer segments. We're working with a medical food and FDA labeled
Is that
medical
right?
food.
Okay,
It's
there you
a
go.
New market,
There you go,
new
absolutely.
interesting market.
Absolutely.
Fascinating. Tell me about what you see in the future. As you look into your crystal ball,
Yeah.
3 to 5 years out,
Mhm.
what does digital marketing for the pharmaceutical executive look like 3
Yeah.
to 5 years out?
Yeah.
And you talked about
So-
a lot of these things, but kind of,
Yeah, I'll try to wrap it up and put a bow on it for you, and I'll do so succinctly also. So one, we're certainly going to see continued gaining of comfort with what I'll call first generation digital channels.
Yep.
You know, search, email, online advertising, right? That's going to become more of the staple, and remote selling, I should say. That's going to become more and more of the staple of how we do things, and it's going to be a changing of the guard. And we're going to be talking about first generation digital the way that today we talk about advertising and office sales calls, right?
Mhm.
That said, there will continue to be a discomfort with second or subsequent generation digital
Social.
channels. Social, augmented reality,
where's mobile fall in that for you?
mobile,
First or
mobile is
second?
second.
Yeah.
Mobile is second. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So we will reach a plateau and go, whew, but then we'll still be looking at this other climb
Yeah.
in terms of the generations of digital channels. So those are the first two things.
So the
that come
third
to mind.
generation doesn't stand a shot. At least
Third,
not for the next
well,
10
third
years.
generation will be beyond the second, and it'll be stuff like, you know, holograms and virtual reality and stuff like
Google
that we're
Glass.
not exactly
Yeah.
stuff that we're not even working with yet, right? Or that we're only dreaming about. The other is the dominance of electronic health records on the patient side and medical records on the professional side.
Yeah.
That coupled with big data, we're going to get savvier with how we use big data, and that coupled with the whole wearable, sensibles, ingestibles environment.
Yeah.
You know, where everything's good. We're going to be the quantified self, as they call it, right? So that's going to continue to grow, and you're going to see applications around that. So that was the third one. The fourth one, I think the greater use of social media is customer service.
Yeah.
Today, for many major corporations, you can get a better response from customer service on Twitter than you can at the 1-800 number. And I think we're going to continue to see that trend grow. And I think you're going to see healthcare and pharma get into that mix also. Yeah. The next one I would say is going to be the bundling of customer services with pharmacologicals. So we talked about that earlier,
Yeah.
right? That our value
Prescription for
offering
service.
has to be more than just that pill. It's got to be the pill and all the things. It's kind of like what we saw with the auto industry, right?
Mm.
There's the basic car, but then there's the roadside service, there's the OnStar.
Interesting analogy. Yeah.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then finally, I would say Salesforce use of remote channels. I think that right now, both from the standpoint of the representative's comfort with the use of the technology, as well as the infrastructures we have around those technologies, and certainly how the remote selling technology is integrated with the non-personal, we're very early on with that.
Yeah.
And there's more stumbling and learning going on right now than there is real productive use of it. But I think that we're going to see healthcare in general come into its own. From providers providing through things like Google Helpouts, and the companies that sell to providers and payers interacting through remote video and teleselling, as well as video and teleservicing.
Mm.
You're going to see the whole ecosystem come into a greater maturity in the use and integration of remote means.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yep.
Well, hey, listen, Craig, I want to thank you for coming. That was a terrific interview.
Yeah,
Really-
thanks for
really
the
appreciate
invitation.
your
I
time.
enjoyed it.
Craig is going to stick around to answer questions, so
Yep.
if you have questions, please email 9090@ehsmail.com. That's 9090@ehsmail.com. And we'll take those questions now.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. Okay, looking forward to your questions.